additional 2 years under President Obama. I worked with Robert Mueller for many years. I remember reaching out to him after 9/11 and the news that the technology available at the FBI was so ancient on the day of the attack on 9/11 that you could buy more modern and effective technology at a Radio Shack. I said to him, I am not an expert in this area in any way whatsoever, but I want to help you if I can. I want it to be a bipartisan effort, and we worked together for years. I never, ever questioned Bob Mueller's devotion to our nation or his personal integrity. How did President Donald Trump respond to news of Robert Mueller's passing? I quote the president, "Good. I'm glad he's dead." Let me repeat that. The president said, when notified of Robert Mueller's passing, "Good. I'm glad he's dead." Those reprehensible words should be condemned by every member of the committee on both sides of the aisle. Unfortunately, under Republican leadership, this committee has been complicit in the attacks on Robert Mueller, spending years spreading debunked conspiracy theories about his investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election. We're here today to attack another special counsel investigation led by another honorable public servant. As the title of this hearing makes clear, the majority is wasting this committee's time and resources on another baseless, partisan witch hunt. President Trump spent months attempting to unlawfully overturn his 2020 presidential election loss. It was known as the big lie. We heard it over and over again. It culminated in a deadly attack on the Capitol, which many of us lived through on January 6th. Then President Trump removed hundreds of pages of classified documents from the White House, and as a private citizen, held them at his Mar-a-Lago residence, some next to a toilet, refusing for more than a year to return these documents. Despite this unprecedented and egregious conduct, my Republican colleagues claim the Watergate-level scandal is the actual investigation into Trump's brazen transgressions, not his historically dangerous action. It would have been a dereliction of duty for any prosecutor investigating the effort to overturn the 2020 election not to subpoena organizations like Turning Point USA, an organization that helped plan the so-called Stop the Steal rally that led to the January 6th deadly attack on the United States Capitol. Similarly, any prosecutor worth his salt would have subpoenaed Kash Patel, who was a material witness in the classified documents case. Patel even infamously claimed to be the sole witness of President Trump's supposed blanket declassification of classified documents. Now, if my Republican colleagues were serious about this issue, they would have called Special Counsel Jack Smith to testify under oath before this committee. The Democrats on this committee notified the chairman in October of last year, 6 months ago, that Smith was not only available to testify, he would do so under oath and answer the questions raised in this hearing. What has happened in the last 6 months? No action by the Republican leadership of this committee to bring the sole major witness of this event before the committee under oath to ask specific questions. Why? Why is this committee afraid to bring Jack Smith before it under oath? For 6 months, they have avoided it. You want to know why? They can continue these sham hearings over issues that don't exist. The majority has also refused to support committee Democrats' request to release Volume 2 of Special Counsel Smith's report, which Senator Whitehouse noted. Let me draw attention to the issues the committee should be addressing instead of this farce today. Over the past year, President Trump, Attorney General Bondi, and Director of the FBI, Patel, have systematically dismantled the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the premier law enforcement agency in the United States, if not the world. These purges are making every American less safe. Most recently, Patel reportedly fired at least 6 agents and several other FBI personnel who'd been assigned to work related to President Trump's mishandling of classified documents. These terminations were seemingly to save face with President Trump in response to the negative press Director Patel received for his embarrassing appearance chugging beer at the Olympic Games. Several of the fired agents were reportedly part of a global counterintelligence squad, which Senator Whitehouse has referred to, particularly appropriate at a time we are at war with Iran. In other words, Director Patel's political retribution has weakened the FBI's ability to counter Iranian threats at the exact time that not only America, but certainly the men and women in uniform needed them to keep themselves safe. Watergate is the story of a president who engaged in a vast illegal conspiracy to remain in power and uses control of the levers of government to obstruct investigations into his own misconduct. Back then, the Senate stood up for the Constitution and the rule of law, exposing Nixon's corruption by investigating the serious allegations against him. Today, Senate Republicans waffle between indifference to outright celebration of President Trump's brazen misconduct, despite the real dangers it poses. We cannot continue on this course. The American people face real challenges from citizens being summarily executed for exercising their First Amendment rights into the skyrocketing price of the cost of living under this administration. This hearing will not help a single person other than Donald Trump, and the Republican majority should do better for their constituents. A senator from Texas should know a dead horse when he sees one. This hearing is an attempt to throttle a dead horse to a gallop. There aren't enough giddy-ups in the world to accomplish that goal. I yield.
For a Chicago man, that was an awful lot of rodeo references.
Chairman, I don't quite know how to do this, but I would like to ask that this transcript be made an exhibit in this proceeding. It's 22 pages of examination of the witness in which only these words are public. So upon the advice of counsel, I'll be invoking my Fifth Amendment privilege. The whole rest of it is redacted. I assume that it can go in as an exhibit with the image of all the redactions. And if that's the case, I'd like to ask that it be made an exhibit in this proceeding.
Without objection, it will be admitted. Also, on behalf of Chairman Grassley and Senator Johnson, Chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, I enter into the record 30 newly uncovered and significant investigatory documents regarding Arctic frost that shed light on the decision-making of the Biden Department of Justice. This includes 197 subpoenas targeting over 400 Republican individuals and entities that former special counsel Jack Smith and his team issued as a part of the indiscriminate election case against President Trump. These are not routine materials. These are internal investigative records that shed light on how and why the Biden Department of Justice authorized and carried out this operation. They detail the scope of the subpoenas issued, the categories of the 400 individuals and organizations targeted, and the decision-making process inside the department at the highest levels. In short, they allow us to see clearly and for the first time how this investigation was conducted from the inside. This new information would not have been known but for congressional oversight. I will now introduce the witnesses at this hearing. First witness is Mr. Will Chamberlain, who currently serves as senior counsel at the Article 3 Project. Mr. Chamberlain graduated from University of the Pacific in 2010 with a BA in economics. He received his JD magna cum laude from Georgetown University Law Center in 2015. After graduating Georgetown, he joined Quinn Emanuel, Urquhart & Sullivan in Los Angeles as an associate, where he practiced complex commercial litigation. Mr. Chamberlain later worked as an attorney at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, focusing on class action litigation. In 2019, he revived Human Events, the nation's oldest conservative magazine, where he served as publisher and editor-in-chief. Mr. Chamberlain is also Vice President of External Affairs at the Edmund Burke Foundation, which organizes national conservatism conferences around the world. Christopher O'Leary retired from the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a member of the Senior Executive Service in September 2023 after 2 decades of leading counterterrorism investigation and operations. Mr. O'Leary's last assignment was serving as the U.S. government's Director of Hostage Recovery, where he led an interagency task force dedicated to the mission of safely bringing home Americans taken hostage by terrorist organizations. Mr. O'Leary is also a former United States Marine Corps gunnery sergeant and Iraq War combat veteran. Thank you for that, sir. Mr. O'Leary holds a bachelor's degree in Middle Eastern Studies from Rutgers University, a master's degree from Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business, and a master's degree in Government and National Security from Harvard University. Our third witness is Margot Cleveland, an attorney, legal analyst, and investigative journalist and former academic. After graduating from the Notre Dame Law School, where she earned the Hoynes Prize, the law school's highest honor, Ms. Cleveland served for nearly 25 years as a permanent law clerk for a federal appellate judge on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. Ms. Cleveland is a former full-time university faculty member at the University of Notre Dame, where in 1998 she received the Frank O'Malley Undergraduate Teaching Award, the highest award for undergraduate faculty members. Ms. Cleveland currently serves as the Federalist Senior Legal Correspondent, where she helped lead the Federalist's reporting on the Russia collusion hoax, which won the Dow Grand Prize for Investigative Journalism in 2025. Ms. Cleveland is also counsel for the New Civil Liberties Alliance, where she practices constitutional law and has co-authored several Supreme Court amicus briefs and a petition for certiorari. And Mr. Chamberlain, we'll start with you. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity.
And actually, hold on a second. Before we do that, I need to ask each of you to stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony that you are about to give before this subcommittee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? All of you have answered affirmatively. Please be seated. And now, Mr. Chamberlain, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. On February 26, 2025, Reuters broke a remarkable story. They reported first that in 2022 and 2023, Jack Smith and the Biden Justice Department subpoenaed toll records of calls from Kash Patel and Susie Wiles as part of the now infamous Arctic Frost investigation. Both were private citizens at this time, and the surveillance continued while Wiles was co-managing President Trump's election campaign. This was troubling, but sadly it wasn't shocking. This committee has been investigating Smith's abuse of his subpoena power against a slew of Republican senators alongside Judge James Boasberg's unlawful nondisclosure orders that hid the existence of those subpoenas from those senators. But Reuters, if anything, buried the lead. The article also revealed that in 2023, the Biden FBI had surreptitiously recorded a phone call between Susie Wiles and her attorney. This was a remarkable breach of attorney-client privilege. The Reuters article, relying on 2 FBI sources, claimed that Wiles' attorney had been aware of the surveillance on the phone call, which, if it were true, would have been a shocking ethical breach by Wiles' lawyer. The following day, however, Wiles' lawyer denied having ever consented to any such recording, stating correctly that, quote, if he ever pulled a stunt like that, he wouldn't and shouldn't have a license to practice law, end quote. His denial is, in my view, credible. What lawyer in their right mind would secretly consent to law enforcement recording a privileged phone call with their client? But the lawyer's denial raises more questions than it answers. Why then did 2 FBI sources tell Reuters that the lawyer had consented? Were the sources lying, or were they relying on false records created by FBI agents working with Smith? It wouldn't be the first time FBI personnel have falsified records in their pursuit of President Trump. Remember that Kevin Klein-Smith, a former FBI lawyer, pled guilty to intentionally falsifying information to obtain a FISA warrant in the Russiagate investigation. The scandal isn't merely that this phone call was recorded, it's also about how the records of the recording were hidden. The FBI's primary digital case management system is called Sentinel. Within it, investigators can apply a special designation to a file called prohibited access. Files coded this way become completely invisible in standard Sentinel searches. If an agent runs a keyword search that should hit these documents, the system returns a false negative. It reports no responsive documents, even though they exist. While this prohibited access designation might make theoretical sense for files dealing with the most sensitive classified matters, it clearly does not make sense that records of Susie Wiles' phone call being surveilled would qualify. The agents who marked those records prohibited would have known that. If Wiles' lawyer had been aware of the recording, it would have constituted consensual monitoring. Monitoring such a call would likely require DOJ approval, but it could be lawful. But if Wiles' lawyer did not consent to the recording, we are likely looking at an illegal wiretap of a phone call between a presidential campaign manager and her own lawyer, one where the agent or agents who conducted the wiretap lied about Wiles' lawyer's lack of consent and then coded it as a prohibited file in the hopes that no one would ever find out about it. This would be a more brazen FBI intervention into domestic politics than anything during the Russiagate investigation, which is certainly saying something. We often hear liberal law professors complain about the Trump administration undermining the DOJ and FBI's independence. Sophisticated listeners should immediately translate independent as unaccountable. Illegal wiretaps and inappropriate prohibited file classifications are the fruits of an independent FBI that acted with impunity because it was not subject to the democratic accountability that our Constitution demands. The President is tasked with the responsibility to take care that our laws be faithfully executed, not to submit to the FBI and DOJ, transforming themselves into an unaccountable fourth branch of government. And this body can help by providing essential oversight and scrutiny. I welcome any questions.
Thank you. Mr. O'Leary, you're recognized.
Chairman, ranking member, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. In his farewell address to the nation, President George Washington warned that the health and survival of a republic required leaders who exercise virtue and resist the pull of partisan division. It is in that spirit that I offer my testimony today. I come before you not as an advocate for any political party or position, but as a nonpartisan former special agent of the FBI where I served for over 2 decades. My intent is to provide the committee with a clear, experience-based understanding of how the FBI operates, its investigative standards, institutional culture, and the professional norms that guide its work. The men and women of the FBI have long stood as a quiet bastion between order and chaos, guided not by politics or public acclaim, but by an enduring commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law. Their character is forged in an environment where integrity is not aspirational, it is required. Every day, often without recognition, they make decisions that demand moral clarity, professional restraint, and personal courage. These are not abstract virtues within the FBI. They are lived expectations, reinforced through training, supervision, and deeply rooted in institutional culture. The FBI's investigative process is grounded in predication, facts, intelligence, and evidence, not ideology or affiliation. Agents are trained to clearly articulate and document the factual basis for opening and continuing investigations. And those decisions are subject to multiple layers of supervisory and legal review. Equally important is the internal culture of the FBI. The bureau I served had no tolerance for political ideology or personal bias influencing investigative work. This was not simply a matter of formal policy. It was an expectation reinforced through leadership, peer accountability, and institutional norms. The credibility of the FBI, both in court and in the eyes of the public, depends on that neutrality. And FBI professionals understand that their work must withstand scrutiny, not only in the moment, but years later. Allegation that the FBI has engaged in broad, coordinated conspiracies to investigate individuals based on political affiliation or ideology are inconsistent with my experience and unsupported by evidence or reason. Yet the absence of credibility to these claims has not deterred Director Kash Patel from pursuing what can only be understood as a campaign of retribution against his own personnel. When agents and analysts are removed not for misconduct, but for their lawful participation in duly authorized investigations, the conclusion that such actions are politically driven is self-evident. This form of retaliation against the dedicated professionals of the FBI has eroded trust in leadership, damaged morale, introduced uncertainty across the workforce, and disrupted the continuity of ongoing operations. Equally concerning are the national security implications, with the loss and marginalization of experienced personnel and diminished institutional knowledge, drastically impacting the FBI's ability to effectively confront threats from terrorism, espionage, and cyber adversaries. Left unchecked, Director Kash Patel's actions risk inflicting generational harm on an institution central to the safety and security of the nation. In closing, I would emphasize that the strength of the FBI and our broader system of justice depends on its independence from political influence. It's a principle that those who serve within the Bureau understand as fundamental to their duty. Being an FBI agent is neither a job nor a profession, but rather a vocation. Service to the nation is not a slogan in the FBI, it's a calling, a steadfast commitment to the cause of freedom, democracy, and justice. This ethos is rooted in a tradition of excellence that spans generations. The legacy of the G-Man is not merely a cultural artifact, but a standard, one that reflects professionalism, discipline, and an unyielding pursuit of truth. Each new generation of G-men and women inherit not only the responsibilities of the role, but the weight of that legacy and the obligation to uphold it. Day after day, the men and women of the FBI answer the call and choose duty over comfort, principle over expedience, and service over self. Their work is often unseen and their successes unheralded, but the nation is safer because of their steadfast commitment, their adherence to the rule of law, and their fidelity to the ideals that define the FBI. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Ms. Cleveland, you're recognized.
Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Whitehouse, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify concerning the grave constitutional violations inflicted as part of Arctic frost. After the 2020 election, an anti-Trump FBI agent named Tim Tybalt attempted to use the Justice Department to destroy the president. Tybalt's efforts led to the launch of Arctic frost. Soon after, Merrick Garland tapped Jack Smith, a hyper-aggressive prosecutor known to overstretch the meaning and intent of the law, to serve as special counsel. Smith proved himself true to form, indicting Trump for allegedly violating a statute enacted in the aftermath of Enron, based in part on a theory of criminal liability the Supreme Court would later hold invalid. The Supreme Court would later also halt Smith's efforts to prosecute Trump for actions that fell within the president's official duties. Beyond being a partisan in his own right, Smith stacked his team with partisan Democrats, such as J.P. Cooney and Ray Holser. Cooney and Holser served as Smith's top deputies, and in them we see the clear double standard and political bias that permeated the DOJ and FBI. Before joining Smith's team, Cooney crafted an outrageous sentencing memorandum that sought to send Trump advisor Roger Stone to prison for 7 to 9 years. Cooney's sentencing recommendations were so unhinged that the then Attorney General William Barr intervened. Cooney responded by spreading unfounded rumors that Barr and the acting U.S. Attorney were being improperly political, with media leaks furthering that narrative, eventually leading to an Inspector General investigation. The IG cleared the Trump administration, but chastised Cooney. Holser, for his part, demonstrated his partisan proclivities when he headed up the public integrity section and refused the FBI's request to open an investigation into the Clinton Foundation. But Holser's partisan protection racket went further when he withheld a 6-page timeline of the Clinton Foundation investigation from the then U.S. Attorney operating out of Little Rocket. Instead, he provided an abbreviated 2-page summary that omitted all references to interference from the DOJ and the FBI leadership. In contrast, when the target was Trump, Holser, along with Cooney, drafted a memorandum to justify subpoenaing the toll records of about a dozen members of Congress, notwithstanding internal email discussions acknowledging a clear speech or debate clause problem. They then hid the details of those subpoenas, using the prohibited access functionality of Sentinel, which ghosted the FBI records. As this committee well knows, because many of you were victims, Smith approved the subpoenas and obtained the toll records of Senators Blackburn, Graham, Hagerty, Hawley, Loomis, Johnson, Kennedy, Scott, Sullivan, and Tuberville. Only Senator Cruz escaped the invasion into his privacy and the violation of the speech or debate clause because his cell phone provider questioned the subpoena. From this subcommittee's January 7th hearing, you also know that Smith's team sought a non-disclosure order from Chief Judge James Boasberg, apparently without informing him that the targets were members of Congress. I say apparently because Chairman Cruz's request for the non-disclosure application to be unsealed has been ignored. Yet again, we see the double standard and the weaponization. Judge Boasberg has still failed to order Smith and his prosecutors to show cause for why they should not be held in contempt for concealing the members of Congress were the ones who were being targeted. This fact should not be ignored if you are to believe Smith and the administrative office of the court's testimony that Judge Boasberg did not know that your identities were involved. It makes absolutely no sense that Boasberg would not enter a show cause order to hold Smith accountable for violating your rights, given Judge Boasberg's nearly year-long crusade to hold a member of the Trump administration in contempt. We now know that Smith violated the speech or debate clause, rubber-stamped by Judge Boasberg. He went further and he subpoenaed the toll records of Kevin McCarthy, former Speaker, and Chairman Jim Jordan, again under cover of a non-disclosure order. Add to that the hundreds more served on individual Republicans, including Trump's attorneys, Republican organizations such as Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA. And they didn't seek merely toll records, but also bank records, which revealed the donor base. The breadth of these constitutional intrusions is unprecedented. But to recap, Smith unconstitutionally was appointed special counsel in violation of the Appointments Clause. The subpoenas of the toll records violated the speech or debate clause. The vast and unjustified subpoenas to Republicans and the organizations that were connected to them violated the First Amendment associational rights. The targeting of Trump's attorneys implicates the Sixth Amendment right to counsel. And using prohibited access to bury records is a huge due process violation that raises potential violations of Brady. Smith and his team must be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start with the foundation. Ms. Cleveland, Jack Smith issued nearly 200 subpoenas. Is that correct?
Yes.
Those subpoenas targeted over 400 Republican individuals and organizations, correct?
Correct.
Many of whom had no connection to those who entered the Capitol on January 6th, correct?
Absolutely.
And in fact, some of those organizations didn't even exist on January 6th. Is that correct?
It is.
So we're not talking about a narrow investigation. We're talking about a sweeping operation targeting virtually the entirety of the other side politically.
It was a fishing expedition.
So let's turn to the Constitution. Subpoenaing the toll records of members of Congress, does that raise serious constitutional concerns?
Absolutely. And in fact, we have the PIN who notified the special counsel's office of those concerns. And Jack Smith had apparently said that he was going to consult with the Solicitor General, according to the release of the information from Senator Grassley this morning. Yet when he was deposed by the House and was specifically asked if he spoke with the Solicitor General, he said, on this discrete issue, no.
Among other issues, it raises significant issues with the speech and debate clause, correct?
Absolutely.
So much so that, as you noted, when Jack Smith subpoenaed AT&T to get my toll records, AT&T refused to comply with the subpoena because they concluded that it violated the speech and debate clause. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct, and they backed down.
Jack Smith did not try to enforce that subpoena, did he?
He did not.
He did not go to court and litigate the matter, did he?
He did not.
Does that suggest, as it does to me, that he knew damn well what he was doing was illegal and would not be upheld in court?
It does suggest that.
When the federal government subpoenas donor lists, internal communications, organization records, does that implicate the First Amendment and also freedom of association in particular?
It does, and the Supreme Court made that clear in the NAACP case.
Mr. Chamberlain, aside from the legal violations, what specific crimes, if any, were actually uncovered as a result of the Arctic Frost investigation?
I'm not aware of any crimes that were uncovered.
Would the senators, donors, organizations, and individuals who were surveilled and subpoenaed have ever learned about the Arctic Frost investigation had Trump not won in 2024?
Probably not, mainly because of these non-disclosure orders, but also, I mean, the fact that a lot of these records we're now just learning about them because they were in these prohibited access files only available to the FBI director. So if the FBI director was a Democrat, there's no reason to think we'd know about them.
How would you compare the scope of the violations in Arctic Frost to Watergate?
I think, if anything, it might even be greater. I mean, the scope of this in terms of the sheer number of people and organizations affected, and as I discussed, I mean, this brazen violation of attorney-client privilege, wiretapping a phone call between Susie Wiles and her lawyer, these are egregious offenses. And you know, if Watergate was just about a single break-in, I mean, this is effectively, compound that by 200.
All right, Mr. O'Leary, I appreciate your service. One of the things you testified is you said, quote, the effectiveness and legitimacy of the FBI depend on its independence from political influence. I very much agree with that, and I will say as an alumnus of the Department of Justice, I am deeply saddened, and frankly, I'm angry that under President Biden, the Department of Justice and the FBI were weaponized and its integrity badly, badly compromised. You are right. That's how the FBI is supposed to behave, and that's how the Department of Justice is supposed to behave. So Jack Smith was not investigating a crime based on evidence. He issued subpoenas to get the toll records of the following senators: Mike Lee, seated to my right; Josh Hawley; Lindsey Graham; John Kennedy, seated to my right; Marsha Blackburn; Ron Johnson; Rick Scott; Bill Haggerty; Dan Sullivan; Tommy Tuberville; Cynthia Lummis, and myself. That's over 20% of the Republicans in the United States Senate. Mr. O'Leary, is it consistent with the obligations of the Department of Justice and the FBI to issue subpoenas with no factual basis and no legal basis?
Senator, it is not, and in my experience, FBI agents would never approach a matter without the proper justification and articulable facts to open their investigation. And
okay, good. So you said they would never do that. Judge Boasberg signed an order, I'm holding the order right here, in which he concludes, and I'm going to read, the court finds reasonable grounds to believe that such disclosure, in other words, notifying the senators on that list, will result in destruction of or tampering with evidence, intimidation of potential witnesses, and serious jeopardy of the investigation. Are you aware of any factual basis whatsoever that a dozen senators will destroy evidence?
I am not, but I will tell you that non-disclosure orders are a routine part of investigations.
Based on facts. Give me any hypothetical fact. By the way, do you know any facts that I will destroy evidence? Let's take it me personally.
I cannot,
Because Jack Smith went into court and said, I will destroy evidence if I know about the subpoena. And this clown signed the order one after the other after the other. Are you aware of any basis? Look, I'm a member of the bar. I take my obligations seriously. The FBI signed off on that. Mike Lee concluded he would destroy evidence. John Kennedy, well, Louisiana, maybe. I will say, I'll give a special dispensation for the great state of Louisiana. But there is no basis. By the way, is it consistent with DOJ's obligation to also ask a judge to violate the law and not inform the judge of it?
No, it would not be.
Well, 2 U.S.C. Section 6628 explicitly bars nondisclosure orders applying to the Senate. And yet, in the lawless Department of Justice, I assume they didn't tell Judge Boasberg, hey, we're asking you to violate the law. Would you sign this? Do you assume that as well?
You would have to ask the DOJ that, but you make a good point, Senator.
Thank you. Ranking Member Whitehouse.
Just to follow up on that point, Mr. O'Leary, is the reason that a prosecutor would pursue a non-disclosure order for a toll record subpoena necessarily that it is the subject of the subpoena who would attempt to interfere with or obstruct the investigation, as opposed to the subject of the investigation would attempt to interfere with and obstruct the investigation?
Senator, it depends on the investigation. It could be the subject of the investigation. It could be associates. The idea of a non-disclosure order is to not really let an individual know that they're under investigation.
But one cannot infer from the existence of a non-disclosure order any accusation that the subject of the order was intending to interfere or obstruct. It could just as easily be that it was actually the subject of the investigation, one of the conspirators, for instance, who the court was concerned about, who the prosecutor was concerned about.
It certainly could be, but as I was communicating to Senator Cruz, non-disclosure orders are a routine part of FBI investigations.
Understood. So in your view, what has happened to the FBI and DOJ's national security capabilities in the last 15 months?
They've been decimated. There's been generational damage done.
And with respect to the quiet bastion you referred to, and the standards of virtue and integrity that you spoke so passionately about, were those standards of virtue and integrity, the fidelity, bravery, and integrity of the FBI, met by agents who Kash Patel then turned on and fired?
There is rampant morale, degradation, uncertainty amongst the ranks, and really disheartened career federal public servants who've been dismissed without cause. And
because, in fact, their colleagues understood that they, in fact, met those standards for fidelity, bravery, and integrity, and were nevertheless fired, correct?
Correct.
DOJ and the FBI run under close institutional checks and balances designed to protect the integrity of the organization. Were those applicable to special counsel?
I would assume so. I wasn't involved in that investigation at all, but I can speak to the process that Washington Field Office would follow, and those are the agents that supported that investigation. And
they would follow traditional, regular FBI guidelines.
The documents that I was able to review demonstrated that.
Are you aware that the Trump Department of Justice in the first term subpoenaed information from members of Congress and members of Congress's staff, including toll records?
Senator, the FBI conducting public corruption investigations has been part of its mission for years. I know it's probably disconcerting to any member of Congress or a public official, but the FBI does it with the same integrity that it conducts any investigation. I would say to a fellow Irishman, we would probably work with them on an investigation, but you know, the FBI pursues these despite what side of the aisle you're on.
And they did in the first Trump term of office, and that included getting non-disclosure orders so that the members of Congress did not know their